Wired.com presents The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. And here is your host, David Barr Kirtley.
Hello, and welcome to episode 227 of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. Today on the show, we'll be discussing Season 3 of Black Mirror, which is available now on Netflix. And we previously discussed Seasons 1 and 2 back in episode 153, so definitely go check that out if you missed it. And today's show will potentially involve spoilers for every episode of Black Mirror, so just be aware of that. And I'm joined by 3 guests. So first up, we've got Rafael Jordan, who you may remember from our Star Trek Wishlist panel back in episode 178, and our panel on Killjoys and Dark Matter back in episode 167. He's written 23 feature films that have premiered on video and cable television, including The Lost Colony, Legend of Roanoke, The Immortal Voyage of Captain Drake, Star Runners, and Vampire Nation. One of his films, Yeti, was the Sci-Fi Channel's highest-rated original program of 2008. So, Rafael, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me back, man.
Then next up, we've got Anthony Ha, who you may remember from our panel on Star Trek Beyond back in episode 214. He covers media, advertising, and pop culture for the news site TechCrunch, and a chapbook of his short stories called Love Songs for Monsters was published by Youth in Decline in 2014. So, Anthony, welcome to the show.
Thanks, I'm glad to be back.
And also joining us today is Natalie Zutter. She's a staff writer for Tor.com, where she tackles everything from rape culture in Jessica Jones to the best Hamilton mashups. She's also a playwright and aspiring TV writer, and is one of the Amtrak Writers in Residence for 2017, which will involve spending 2 weeks traversing the U.S. by train while developing a project. So, Natalie, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, and so over email, we've been discussing how Rafael had a crazy Black Mirror watching party yesterday. So let's start off with you, Rafael, and tell us just how did your crazy Black Mirror watching party go?
Actually, it was a lot of fun. Basically, there was definitely a general consensus. The first and fourth episodes were clearly the favorites. But, when it comes to Black Mirror, it's all a sliding scale of excellent to very good. I thought they were all great. But I think the 2 classics were definitely number 1 and number 4.
Okay, well, so paint us a picture here with the ambiance and stuff like that. What was your party like?
Sure. So basically, I had about a dozen friends come over, and it was a combined Walking Dead, Westworld, Black Mirror party, to be fair. But we did knock out all 6 Black Mirror episodes first. And I made sure to only invite my friends that were actually legit fans of the show. So basically, everyone there was pretty receptive to the new stories. And, Black Mirror already set a pretty high bar. But I think this season definitely added a couple of new classics to the catalog.
All right, cool. So how about Natalie? You've been reviewing the show for Tor.com. Tell us a little bit about what sort of writing you've been doing.
Yeah, we've been writing kind of straight episode reviews. I came to Black Mirror late, but I started when the Christmas special came out a year or so ago, White Christmas. And so I wrote kind of a massive review of that. And then I've been the resident Black Mirror person. Every bit of news that's come out about the show, trailers and episode synopses, I've been picking apart for the last few weeks.
So how did you become the resident Black Mirror person? Are you the biggest fan there, or how'd that happen?
Yeah, I just kind of called dibs. There was a period where myself and another staff writer were both in that camp of, I think I should sit down and watch it at some point. And then I just finally took the plunge, I think, like I said, when the Christmas special came out. And so since then, I've just been calling dibs on it.
Okay, and so how about Anthony? Tell us a little bit about your background with Black Mirror.
I actually saw I think my first episode of it, which was the 15 Million Merits episode, like many, many years back, because like a friend sort of insisted that I see it and that it was going to be, that it was going to sort of change everything. And I watched it and liked it a lot, but at the time it wasn't, available legally in the US, and I was too lazy to, or too scared or what have you to track it down. So more recently, as more and more people have talked about it, I did catch up with, the first season and then more recently the second season. So I would say that I'm a fan, but also I've come to it after so many sort of these like really incredible expectations and hype that I wouldn't say that I love the show. I would say that I admire it, but also when it sort of falls flat, as I think it sometimes does, it can also make me a little bit crazy.
It's funny. I have a lot of friends, as I was asking around for people who wanted to come watch. A lot of people said, it's so dark, cynical, and depressing, and it wasn't really their thing. But to me, I think it's just so socially relevant, and it's so scathing, a commentary on where society's going, that to me it's like the best show on TV, basically. I couldn't wait for more.
Yeah, I agree with. Yeah, I've said on our last episode about it that this is my favorite show on TV. Although I agree, Anthony, some of the episodes do fall flat for me. But so Raphael, do you think that Anthony would be allowed into your party given what he just said?
For sure, especially with an open mind. No, I mean, yeah, some people, it's strange to me. Like sometimes you watch a movie or a TV show and it's depressing, and some people don't respond well to that. But I actually like shows with dark themes that really make you think and linger with you after. You know, like the entire history of You was probably my favorite episode. And I just thought it was really haunting, the whole thing, because it seems inevitably where we're heading. And how would you avoid that eventuality?
Yeah, I also really like dark stories, and I really like these anthology shows because they can go really dark at the end. They can kill off all the characters, and it doesn't matter because they're not going to come back next time anyway, right? I don't know, Natalie, would you say you're a fan of dark stuff like this in general?
Oh, definitely. Like you were saying, I think I would much rather have, friends over to watch something that really makes you think, or something where you're all experiencing an emotion beyond just laughing at it. Like I've always been a fan of dark stuff. I mean, my favorite episodes of television are the ones that end on bummer notes or cliffhangers, or that just really stick with you. Even the ones that you feel like you can't watch over and over, that, it's one time is enough. Like, I'd say, yeah, my best bonding experiences with people, like, were over dark stuff. Like, I binged the end of Breaking Bad a year or two ago with my fiance, and I was, sobbing in a ball, but it was also like, wow, what a great experience. It's sort of the equivalent of, like, when you go to a horror movie and you feel very cathartic afterwards.
Absolutely. And here's the interesting thing. Black Mirror fans embrace the show's darkness and themes, but San Junipero I've seen is the consensus favorite episode of this new batch, I think, and it's actually the most heartwarming episode. It's probably the closest thing to a feel-good Black Mirror episode we'll ever get.
Oh, definitely.
Okay, so wait, before we get to that, I want to talk about how so like I said, this is my favorite show, and so I was really looking forward to it coming out on Friday. So I wake up Friday morning, I'm all psyched to watch the show, and Netflix isn't working. And it wasn't working all day long. So I was kind of going crazy. And if you're listening to this in the future, there was this giant DDoS attack that shut down a bunch of big sites, including Netflix, all day long. And it was actually kind of funny because on the Black Mirror Twitter account, they said, Twitter is no longer available to users below a 5-star rating. We apologize for the inconvenience. So I thought that was pretty good. Did anyone else run into any problem? Anyone else try to watch this on Friday and run into any problems?
Actually, that was me behind the attack. I couldn't watch till Sunday, so I wanted to make sure no one else could either.
I didn't watch till Friday evening anyway. I thought about trying to use the excuse to miss work or just be streaming it at the office, but I waited till the evening, and thankfully it was back up by then.
Yeah, I binged all of them on Saturday, and everything worked smooth. I think there were a few moments where Netflix seemed to be having a little bit of a hard time, which I think it sometimes does when things are just really popular, but everything mostly went smoothly.
Yeah. Okay. And so, like, if that 5-star rating thing, that's a reference to the first episode of this new season, which is called Nosedive, which is about a sort of satirical future world in which everyone has a social media score that everyone else can see at all times, thanks to special contact lenses. And everything in your life, a lot of your opportunities, like job opportunities and hotels and car rentals and all sorts of things, are determined by your social media score. So how about Natalie? What did you think of this first Nosedive episode?
Well, so Nosedive was one of the ones I was most looking forward to because, like I said, in every news item about synopses and previews and stuff, it was one of the ones they were pushing. I think partly because Charlie Brooker had, I don't think he even co-wrote it. It was written by Rashida Jones and Michael Schur, who did Parks and Rec and now The Good Place. And they were working off an outline Charlie Brooker gave them. And so I think Netflix was pushing it because of to sort of show the America-UK partnership that was happening. And I, love shows like that. So, and I love social commentary. So I thought it was going to be like a perfect me kind of episode. I was not a huge fan. It kind of let me down as it went on. Like I loved the premise, but I don't know if I loved the story, especially because I found that I had trouble sympathizing with Lacey, Bryce Dallas Howard's character. And I'm curious what you guys thought, because she was, for the viewers to refresh memories, she's someone who goes around kind of indiscriminately 5-starring everyone because she's a social climber and she believes that, if she 5-stars people, she'll get 5-starred back. And in my opinion, she came off as, way too eager and way too fake, which made for a fascinating character. But I think as my first episode in, it was tough. What did you guys think?
I actually really liked it and thought it was relevant to me. As someone that's trying to get ahead in Hollywood as a filmmaker, I feel like it really encapsulated to some degree what I do. I mean, I'm constantly promoting other people's work and essentially five-starring them publicly, because it's kind of what you do. You want people to speak well of you and your projects. I'm always speaking well of other people's projects, even when they're clearly not that great. It's just, it's truthfully what you do. So, because people always say, oh, on Facebook, you seem to like everything. Well, it's kind of like the public front you kind of need to put up. But I actually thought it was a really interesting episode because it kept you guessing. I kept thinking I knew where the story was heading, and it kept doing something different. So I thought it was definitely pretty interesting, and it's Instagram 24/7 basically. I could see it happening.
Wait, so are you going to be giving every episode 5 stars?
No, because I don't know Charlie Brooker personally, unfortunately.
And he'd probably see through that anyway.
So how about Anthony? How much did you like this episode?
Well, it was interesting because, I mean, in terms of that, those expectations and like sort of the buildup that Natalie was talking about, I felt like this episode was also being talked about as sort of like the funny one because of, the backgrounds of the writers and everything. And I found this to be like completely excruciating, like where it was just, I was like constantly on edge and stressed out. And I was watching with other people and we kept like looking at each other being like, when is this episode going to be over? I'm so stressed out right now. But I think like it was interesting because while I watched it, I did not enjoy it at all, but I really liked the ending. And I also like, I think afterwards felt a certain, again, that sort of like admiration, not necessarily loving it, but like the fact that they were able to do something that felt so spot on and so full of like social anxiety. I think like that was exactly what they were going for, even if it wasn't necessarily super enjoyable to watch.
That's actually a great point, Anthony, because my friends and I, we had an extreme sense of dread watching it. It really was kind of like watching a horror film play out because you're enjoying the uncomfortable nature of it. And the whole time I kept saying, I really don't want to see this speech. It's going to be a disaster.
Oh, yeah, same. I was cringing my way through it and just being like, no, just stop while you're ahead. Take a hint. Read the room. Don't do it.
Yeah, I was watching through my fingers. I was like, I had to cover my,
Yes.
I mean, which I have to do for anything when there's any kind of embarrassment on TV. And this was like my hell. It was amazing.
Yeah, it was amazing for me. Yeah, I just had like a sick feeling in my stomach the whole episode. And it sort of reminded me of high school. It was like weird because I haven't been in an environment in which being worried about your popularity matters that much since high school. And it was like really amazing how much this dredged up those feelings, just the physical stress, like you're saying, yeah, of being concerned about what other people are saying about you or thinking about you.
One of the other things I really admired about the episode was I felt like there were a lot of subtle touches about how the system worked that made it feel more realistic to me. Like the fact that when they talk about the different benefits you have, it's usually not this sort of like immediately overt system, but it's more like, oh yeah, there's like this, little VIP program. And if you have this, then you see it, like you can imagine sort of going from where we are now to then connecting to, oh, okay, like this is like the influencer program, but just taken to the next level. So I feel like they kind of also balance that line where you can actually, where it's a little ridiculous, but you can also imagine that we could actually get there.
Totally agree. With I forget the name of it, but the condominium she's looking at, like when she's looking to move, that was really interesting world building, like you said, because there's the influencer program and there's this sense of like, well, it's a community and we want to kind of pick and choose who lives here. For me, it was when she's at the airport and, her flight gets canceled and the next flight is just out of her reach. And it's like, it's a flight. It's a couple hours of your life. But even that has been so stratified by, this class as marked by stars.
Yeah, and I mean, there's even apps already for Facebook and other social media sites that measure your sphere of influence, and you get rewarded based on how many followers you have, So it's definitely another way where I think they're just looking to how it's going to play out sooner or later to some degree.
Yeah, I agree that the world is like this sort of crazy satirical world, but I really see this technology in some form or another as inevitable. I mean, it's just like your Uber thing, right? Just for everything.
It's funny you say that because I actually thought about that. Yeah, how when you're a Lyft or Uber driver, you have to stay above 4.9 or you get deactivated or something. But there was a lot to like in the episode. I also just thought, the production design of it, all the pastel colors, because it was kind of like everyone was trying to just be as pleasant and as innocuous as possible all the time, and it kind of bled into every facet of life.
Yeah, no, I agree totally. The visuals, I thought visually it was just amazing to look at.
Yeah, we should maybe mention that it was directed by Joe Wright, the film director, and I mean, I think it didn't necessarily look like his other movies, but like the fact that you had somebody with that background, I think it definitely showed.
Yeah.
I'm going to mention one other criticism I had is that I felt like there were two characters, the brother character and the truck driver lady character, who I felt like just told the audience how we should be feeling about these things, just flat out. And I really think that the episode would have been more effective to me if there had been a little bit more of the advantages and disadvantages of living in this sort of society, and it trusted us to make up our own mind about how we feel about it a little bit more. I mean, maybe not at the end, but early, I felt like the whole thing was telegraphed that this is a terrible society, and I think it would have been more interesting if it was a little bit more ambiguous.
It's an interesting point, but you're also assuming that most people would side with the truck driver or the brother, and I'm not so sure. I mean, if you put any of us into that society and said, well, choose, I think I would still pretty much do what she was trying to do, because it's, I am essentially, so I'm guilty.
Well, I think it's one of those situations where if the majority are doing it, if you start getting swept up into that structure, as a self-preservation, you have to go along with it. Like, there are people who can live off the grid, so to speak, like the truck driver, but even hers came after she became obsessed with the status and lost her husband. I'm not proud to say I probably would also be the person who would start trying to rack up those stars, even just to sort of live at the level that Lacey's brother's living, which I think was like a 3.7 or something. I think that once you start assigning that stigma around anything, below a 2.5, you're just going to have people naturally kind of swimming with the current.
Yeah, I thought the truck driver character is interesting because I think she also illustrates this idea that you can survive below a certain level. It's just very difficult. But I agree with David that, I mean, especially the truck driver scene, it was definitely felt like, okay, let me tell you what the message of this episode is, which, I mean, I think that in general, like, I feel like that's something I struggle with Black Mirror, where I feel like it's constantly kind of being like, all right, here's what this show is about. But like, that was, I thought, particularly blatant.
Well, to play devil's advocate, guys, I actually thought her comeback was really salient and was correct. I mean, she countered the truck driver's diatribe by saying, look, it's really easy to look back and be judgmental once you've had it and lost it, but I'm still trying to have it. I mean, so I think to me, that's actually the most relevant point is until you have had it, you're going to want it,
Right. But then the fact that she struggles so hard to get it is what brings her down. I mean, I feel like that's where they kind of they show their hand, and that like that the struggle is sort of implied to not have been worth it.
Yeah,
I mean, perhaps. I guess I'm still thinking about it.
but
no, I mean, I think there's a lot there.
But Rafael, I mean, are you? I feel like there's no doubt in my mind how Charlie Brooker feels about this world. I mean, that's what I'm saying. Not what would you do in that world, but how does he feel about this?
Well, I mean, I wonder, like, in general, do you ever question, like, the author and their intentions? Because, for instance, when you're writing science fiction, you have to portray everything as a cautionary tale, even if you don't actually feel that way. So it's a little bit of a death of the author kind of thing. I don't know I guess he probably does feel this way, but sometimes, I think that's a mistake we make, thinking that, like, you watch a movie like Gattaca, the author isn't necessarily saying we shouldn't do that, because the society was better for the majority of people. From a utilitarian perspective, it was better.
Okay, how about Natalie? Final word on Nosedive.
You guys got me, what's the opposite of a nosedive? Kind of moving my opinion up a little bit more in talking about the more of the nuance in between, the reasons that people do it and being kind of like stuck in the system and trying, like Lacey says, she's still trying to find her way up. So, I'd say, coming out of this conversation, I have a slightly higher opinion of it. Maybe I'd move it up from like 3 to 4 stars.
Okay, that's good. So it's going to have many more opportunities now, this episode.
I mean, it's certainly on the nose a little, the episode, well, obviously nosedive, but we do spend, if you allow yourself to fall into it, you could spend half your day every day on Snapchat, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. I mean, it's really, it sucks you in. So you have to, I guess, combat it while you're also being part of it.
Yeah. Okay, so we have 5 more episodes, so I think we need to move on. But so the next episode on this roster was called Playtest, and it's about American tourist in England, and he needs money to get home, and so he gets a job as a playtester for a new virtual reality horror game. So about Rafael, what did you think of this episode?
I had high hopes for this one, actually, because I'm a big fan of the director, Dan Trachtenberg. His Portal short film a few years back was really superlative, and that led to him doing 10 Cloverfield Lane. So I definitely was looking forward to it. I think it plays really well, but ultimately it was one of the lesser episodes to me, just because it didn't have a lot to say, social commentary-wise. It played like a really good thriller or horror film, but it wasn't as Black Mirror-y as I had hoped, I guess.
So Anthony, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed it. I mean, especially I think watching them in succession, it just felt doing this thing that felt more this sort of like, horror-y kind of romp, was just like a nice release after, Nosedive. But I mean, I think like, yeah, it felt a little light. And then I also just thought the ending, where it was sort of, revealed that he was killed because his phone was still on, just felt like very arbitrary. And like there was not really a lot of point to it, but they just kind of had to end the episode. So that really diminished my my feelings about it.
Yeah, I agree with that. The ending, especially given how much effort they had gone to establish this character, which I thought they did it was interesting because the first 20 minutes or so of this episode, there's no no technology or science fiction particularly. It's just kind of you're establishing these characters, and given how well established I felt he was, that to have him die like so, in such a random way, it did feel like something of a letdown to me. I don't know, Natalie, what do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I weirdly enough, Playtest was actually the first episode I saw because I got to catch it at New York Comic Con like 2 weeks early, and yeah, it threw me off because it felt like a solid thriller, like a very meta, self-aware horror movie. It actually reminded me a lot of this movie I saw at the Tribeca Film Festival called Fear Inc., which I think just came out. An indie, very similar premise of a guy who kind of has this curated horror experience and is constantly questioning what's real and what's not. So as a horror installment, it was really interesting, but it did not feel like a Black Mirror episode to me much at all.
What did you think of the main character?
I thought it was fun. It was goofy. I mean, again, I feel like in a lot of my commentary on Black Mirror, I'm trying to find that analog to America, which may or may not be there. I might be seeing something that's not. But, so many of the other episodes were just set in the UK. And like the Christmas special was the first time, I think, one of the first times they brought in an American in the form of John Hamm. So looking at this character, I think Cooper was his name. Mm-hmm. He was so goofy and so kind of privileged. I mean, he was this white guy who just kind of left home and decided to go travel the world. And we knew that he was probably working odd jobs to get by, but he had a debit card and an ATM, and the fact that he could sort of just drop everything and drop a mother who clearly needed him and ignore her calls. While I sympathize, on the one hand of having difficulty talking to a parent after such a loss, at the same time, I just found him so, I guess, grating. And so even as he was walking his way through the haunted house and reasoning out the horror in the same way that I do when I watch a scary movie, like I will talk myself through it and say, well, this jump scare already happened a scene ago, so it can't happen again, and it's all fake. As much as I sympathize with all of that, overall, I just found him very grating.
Also, to answer your question, David, I read in an interview with Dan Trachtenberg that when they cast Wyatt Russell as Cooper, it actually led to the rudeness of the character being toned down a lot, so the audience would hopefully root for him to learn a lesson, but it didn't work necessarily, apparently.
Huh.
I liked him. I mean, I felt like I know this guy, I mean, I think for the kind of like Twilight Zone story that this is, I thought he worked because he's so not the typical. I feel like the characters tend to be a lot more bland in these sorts of stories, and I felt like he had a lot more personality and a lot more, a lot more individuality than I would have necessarily expected.
Yeah, no, he was definitely a cool character.
Sorry, Anthony, what'd you say?
Oh, I was going to say, no, I just that I agree. And I mean, I found him to be an interesting. I mean, I also found him to definitely be grating, especially during the initial setup of the playtest sequence where, every single thing he has to make a joke about. And you're just like, oh my God. But I was also like, oh, I know this guy. Like, this is definitely, I can, see this. So, I mean, I really did like the character work. And like you said, I think that was part of why I was so annoyed with the ending.
Well, speaking of that ending, apparently it was a 11th hour edition. That same article I was reading said that the extra twist was not in the original script, but something Brooker added after conversations with Trachtenberg just to get out of there with a little bit extra punch, I guess.
So was the original ending supposed to be the second reveal when he comes home and his mother has Alzheimer's?
I'm not certain. I thought maybe it just meant he would wake up in the office and realize it had all been in his head after all and get out of there scot-free, but I'm not sure.
And I mean, I get that. I think it's probably hard. It's a hard episode to end because, I mean, that ending is just sort of would also be kind of deflating where you're just like, all right, well, nice work. See you later. But I'm not sure I love the alternative they came up with.
Yeah, I feel like this is a Philip K. Dick, Three Stigmatov, Palmer Eldritch type story where once you've entered some sort of altered reality, how do you ever know if you've come out of it again? Mm-hmm. But yeah, I feel like a lot of these Black Mirror episodes, they have a moral, like there's like a moral to the story, and it's in some sort of moral universe where people are punished in some reasonable proportion to their sins. And this was an episode where, trying to steal a picture of the video game equipment, it felt like, to balance those moral scales, he should have been punished somehow, but had to have him die like that felt like it was, it was off the scale. It felt like, he should have gotten scared really badly or something, but not killed, is how it felt to me.
You're right. I mean, his punishment should have been being trapped in the game endlessly or something on a loop until he could, never find his way out or something. That was too harsh.
Okay, any other final thoughts about playtest?
I did really like the spider with him, with the guy's face. I thought that was like a really great effect, but also the fact that he, like, as part of that escalation where at the beginning you see all these like scary kind of jump scare things, but because they can't hurt him, like, so I just loved how that played out where like weird crap would happen, but like he'd be like, oh yeah, whatever, it's fine.
See, my favorite was in terms of the scares was when Sonia, the girl, finds him and it's that moment where, your savior mysteriously arrives and he's like, but how did you know how to find me? I'm out in the woods. I'm the second, location. And then she just does that great, like, heel face turn where she just picks up a knife and is suddenly like she's the killer in his, reality, because clearly his subconscious is saying, like, this girl's too good to be true or whatever. And the way she starts stalking him, saying, like, you should have called your mother, Cooper. I thought that was a moment that I thought was really just, like, fun and taps into those horror tropes without feeling cliched.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I agree that I liked the way that he's self-aware about the horror tropes and is able to predict them. And I also I liked that it was drawing, the premise is sort of that it's going into his memories and pulling out the things that are going to scare him the most. And I feel like there's more it could have done with that notion that it never quite did. I don't know if anyone agrees with that or not.
I thought it did a lot with the horror and with the different kinds of horror. There's actually, as I was watching these, I was reading along on Reddit and seeing what people were saying, and someone made a really good point that if you actually start sitting down and thinking about all of these nested narratives as, like, the little Matryoshka dolls of what he's thinking, that so much of it that you don't think about being in his head is, like, the fact that he never actually meets Sho Saito, but he has, like, an image of him in his head from, like, the articles he's read, and then when you do see the real Sho in the end, it, like, kind of matches up but kind of doesn't with the personality he created. And so I thought that, it's the kind of thing where, yeah, you probably could have spent more time in the haunted house itself with him, but I also find myself spending more time thinking about the episode and about those nested layers of, like, how much was real and how much wasn't.
That's interesting. All right, so let's move on to episode number 3. It's called Shut Up and Dance. So this is about a young, like a teenage guy, I think, is jerking off in front of his computer and realizes that it sent messages indicating that hackers have filmed him and they're threatening to release this video unless he serves as their gopher on some sort of nefarious mission. So Anthony, what do you think of this episode?
I mean, this was another one where I felt like I just sort of enjoyed it almost as this sort of like romp, which I think, again, the people who watched it with me were kind of disagreed because I think they had a lot more stress about it than I did. But just as like something where you just enjoy seeing the mechanics of everything kind of play out, I just, it was just sort of one of the most kind of purely entertaining episodes. But again, I think as with Playtest, I felt like as it sort of approached the ending, it just kind of, didn't. I just don't think it really like had anything interesting to say in the ending. So just having them sort of release everything in this, very kind of, bleak and depressing kind of way. I'm not sure it really fit with the episode. And again, with some of, because I was really rooting for this guy in this situation. I was just like, I wasn't crazy about where it ended up.
I mean, I thought it was a quintessential middle of the road Black Mirror episode, which is actually to say, quite good. But it was a fun movie. I kept thinking, or fun. It kept reminding me of Die Hard 3. How they had to keep going to the next place, the next instruction, but it also kind of reminded me of White Bear in the end when you realize, because the whole time you're wondering, why is this kid jumping through so many hoops? All he was doing was jerking off, right? But It was actually worse than that. And so the payoff I thought was actually pretty satisfying because it kind of tied the whole thing together.
Although I actually thought it was more interesting when it was this idea of, well, you did this thing that really isn't that bad, but if we release this, it would still ruin your life in a lot of ways. And that to me made the anxiety he was feeling both feel realistic, but also more relatable. So that was, maybe another reason why I didn't love the sort of twist at the end.
Well, I think his anxiety is, at least up until the reveal, is very much on par with the cringiness of Nosedive, where you're thinking like, oh God, like I would never want to be in that experience. Because it would, especially for a teenager, and he's clearly he's not like, the most popular kid in his class or anything. He just has a pleasant enough nightlife, works at the fast food place, but, that's the kind of thing that would just cripple him socially. But I don't know, I really liked the episode, partly because of the twist, partly just because I thought it was this fascinating commentary on, all these, mostly men, but there was the female CEO who, had done these repugnant things, and then we're all being forced to sort of like become errand boys. And then in the case of Hector, the married man with the affair, and Kenny, it was like this weird quasi male bonding thing where they're like driving together, and Hector's being like, oh, it's okay, like everyone jerks off, come on, like you're just a normal kid, and almost like kind of fatherly to him. So I found it almost like slyly satirical in that sense, which elevated above mid-level for me. And White Bear is one of my favorite episodes, so I did like the reversal. It definitely, threw me for a loop and made me question a lot of it. And it was the kind of episode where I just sat there after the credits, like taking it in. We definitely had to take a break and like turn off the TV, get up, walk around, watch something else.
Oh man, speaking of the Hector character, I really enjoyed that he was played by Jerome Flynn, Bronn from Game of Thrones. That guy's always great. But I'd read that he said that the story actually went through a lot of different versions, where there was an iteration without a final twist, and where even he and the kids' characters were reversed as to who had the darker secret.
Oh yeah, I read that.
I think the story works either way because, if you're, the thing is, at some point, your fear of being outed as, you wouldn't want people to see you jerking off if you're in high school, sure, but you also wouldn't necessarily rob a bank unless you had something really bad to hide. So at some point, they had to up the stakes, I think.
Right. So let's just say the twist is that it comes out at the end that he's been jerking off not to sort of normal adult porn as we had assumed, but to child pornography. And so that obviously changes completely how you view this character. But why don't you say, Rafael, talk about White Bear, maybe for people who haven't seen it, don't remember it. Talk about how you see the parallels between those two episodes?
Sure. Well, White Bear was a pretty good episode. I mean, you're following the woman who wakes up in the room. It's very Kafka-esque because she can't remember anything, and she's wandering around the town, and it's all very creepy. And, she's on the run from these hunters. But then, of course, everyone's filming her, and it's all very sadistic because they're not coming to her aid. But then by the end, you realize why, and it's because, she was a murderer. She'd killed a child, if I recall.
Yeah.
And so basically she was forced to relive the same day over and over without any memory of, what she had done or how she got there. And basically that was her punishment. So in a sense, it was kind of just similar thematically in that we were rooting for a character all along who was not actually redeemable, I guess.
Yeah, I think I agree. That's really interesting is that it takes these characters who've done these horrible things, but you start out the story from their point of view and you don't know about the horrible things they've done until you establish this baseline of empathy with them. And then it really is a mind fuck at the end then when whenever all your sympathy for them is thrown into question.
Well, and I think it's particularly in this episode, I mean, I think that a lot of that work is also done with the casting. I mean, Rafael already mentioned, the actor from Game of Thrones. And then also, I forget his name, but the actor who's playing the teenage lead, I thought it was just you completely bought this, that he's in this intense, pain and when he pees himself, you really feel for him. And so I think I think for that reason that definitely the sort of twist at the end is much more effective because of that.
And I'll say I was just riveted throughout this episode. I mean, I could not wait to see what happened next. It was just really, really intense and just held my attention so much. Oh, and also, I mean, we were talking about how the earlier episode Nosedive seems like something that could happen, in the near future. I mean, this seems like something that could happen right now. I mean, sufficiently motivated hackers, could do something like this right now, and that's a pretty scary thing.
No, that's absolutely true. Although I suppose I was wondering on just a purely logistical, technical level, how they could convey what he was looking at on his own screen. I guess they would take screen grabs up. But, because couldn't he just deny it, basically? I mean, I kept thinking to myself, if I was that kid, I would just lie, man.
No, I had the same thought. And then I read something where there's a part when Hector and Kenny are in the car, and Hector says something about, the affair, because same thing with Hector, he didn't actually go through with it with, this supposed prostitute who actually was someone from the hacker thing impersonating her. But then he says oh, but they also had my hard drive and I had a lot of explicit messages and photos, probably of, dick pics or something. And that's when Kenny starts breaking down because he realizes they have his hard drive. So any photos he has would be pulled. That was my understanding of
it. Yeah, no, I read
the same.
I think I read the same article as you, and I hadn't actually gotten that during the episode. I had the same thought as you guys, but yeah, that that answers that question for sure.
The episode also reminded me a little bit of this Bruce Sterling short story, which I'm probably going to mispronounce the title. I think it's Maniki Neko, which is about this sort of carefully orchestrated thing where everything comes together, except that it's instead this sort of thing that something living in the cloud that's making life better for everyone. So it was really fun seeing sort of the inverse where, again, someone has this really careful planning, but it's actually just to do something really terrible.
Okay. Any final thoughts on Shut Up and Dance?
Yeah, just that it was a good thriller. It really did keep you, on the edge of your seat. It was gripping, but ultimately just a pretty good Black Mirror episode.
So 3 stars?
I'd give it 3.5.
All right.
Would not let it on the plane.
Okay, so then next up we've got San Junipero, which has a bit of a mysterious vibe at first. There are 2 women who are meeting up and falling in love in what seems to be the 1980s in a nightclub. And but every night at midnight, they're going to have to, something weird is going to happen. They're going to disappear or something. And we slowly start to puzzle together what's going on. But so Natalie, what did you think of San Junipero?
It was my favorite of this, which is so funny because as we said in the beginning, tonally it's not your usual Black Mirror thing. And it's funny, I didn't try to find a lot out about it ahead of time because I knew it was set in the 1980s, and I'd read a few interviews with Charlie Brooker where he was very vague and just said, this is our take on a period piece. And so I didn't even try to go into it unraveling, what the hook was, and just sort of enjoyed it. And it was also, like I said, I finished Shut Up and Dance, took a break, watched some other TV, and then jumped right into San Junipero. I thought that, I always love everything that, I will probably butcher her name, that Gugu Mbatha-Raw is in. And Mackenzie Davis, I haven't seen. I think she's on *Halt and Catch Fire*, and I haven't seen that yet. But she was just so adorable and sweet and naive and awkward, and I thought she was kind of a great audience way into this world of San Junipero and the 1980s, which we later find out, is probably an era she never actually lived through, and so it's all new to her, which I thought was a great take on like a nostalgic story. Was that so many of us think like 1980s, like in my case I was born during them, or others case living through them, coming of age, being an adult. And so I liked that for her it was as alien as if it were 2020 or 2040. And I overall thought it was this bittersweet story. I loved seeing like a queer love story on television with a diverse cast, with a black woman and a white woman, a bisexual woman and a lesbian. And well, I'll say more as we go through, but those were my initial thoughts.
Okay, speaking of your initial thoughts, did you have any initial assumptions about what was going on that turned out to be wrong?
I think I only got as far as like time travel, and it wasn't even until the halfway point when what's her name, Yorkie is looking for Kelly, and the guy says like, well, look for her in the 90s or look for her in the 2000s. Actually, I think before that I did, when they were talking about time running out and the fact that like San Junipero was this very sprawling area but also felt very almost like claustrophobic, I definitely thought, I thought like a simulation, but not a simulation the way it ended up being. I thought maybe it was like an experiment, like almost like a village kind of community where you can only spend so much time there, but there's not really an outside world that's important. So I definitely felt like something was up, but I didn't get very far. Like I said, it was sort of one of those where I just let it happen. What about you guys?
I thought this episode was basically perfect. I would have sat through 5 other terrible episodes just to get to this one. I really thought it worked on every single level. And my friends and I, as we were watching it, we kept trying to guess what was really happening. And we were kind of thinking, they reference at one point how many people down on the street are really actually there or not. And so we were thinking it was kind of Westworld meets The Matrix, where, very few actual tourists and the rest are just programs. So it was an interesting twist that everyone was actually, in every sense, alive. It's just many of them had died in the real world, and it was just their minds, just their consciousness. And so I thought the episode really had like some high-minded sci-fi ideas too. I mean, not only was it just a really great moving, emotionally, satisfying episode with good themes, but, the whole, can we ever actually upload our consciousness into a computer one day, or would it just be a copy? I mean, that's something I think about a lot, and they didn't really get into that per se, but it got me thinking about it. So I like that aspect.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that this was, I think definitely the most moving episode of the season. I mean, I really enjoyed it. And similarly, genuinely, I think at some point I said out loud, like, I have no idea where the hell this is going, and that makes me so happy. And I really had these random guesses. I think at first, because Yorkie was the Mackenzie Davis character was being so vague about where she came from, I assumed that was going to be the sort of science fictional hook, that she was like from the future or something. So I definitely did. And then I thought it was just like really masterful the way they like parceled out information, where they like reveal at a certain point, oh, you can like travel to different eras. Oh, like how many of these people are dead? Oh, there's something really important that happens at midnight, but we're like not going to show you for the first couple of times and just make you completely crazy. So I just thought, I mean, the construction of it was just really good. And I think that, the issues that Rafael was talking about in terms of, how much of yourself survives without a physical body, I thought they sort of skirted, but even so, I mean, I thought it was, this is definitely, one of my favorites of the season.
That's interesting, Anthony, that the mystery of it was a big draw for you. I mean, that was something that kind of drove me a little crazy, is that like I felt like for so much of the episode, I didn't have any idea what was going on. I felt like it was sort of distracting me from getting engaged in the emotional story of these characters. I have a feeling if I were to go back and watch it, I would think it was great. But I think just like the first time through, I was just a little frustrated, like how long it took before I even understood that that this was about virtual reality. I mean, I was assuming from the beginning it was about time travel somehow, or maybe Yorkie was from the 50s and she had come forward in time to the 80s or something, which turned out to be true in a way. But I don't know. I guess everyone else seems to have just not been bothered by that at all.
No, but I get what you're saying. Because like in trying to think about the episode again today and writing the review, I realized that the actual like details of their love story had kind of jumbled together, and I didn't really remember what emotional beats were there because my mind was so preoccupied with the notions of like the afterlife and stuff like that. So I think it's a kind of episode, probably of the six, although we'll see when we talk about the other ones. I think it's the one that might bear the most opportunity for rewatching and like picking out visual details, obviously in the direction and in costuming and set design, but also I think in the story and thinking about the layers again of who's what. And if I could touch upon a point we were making a second ago about the these, you know, how much of your consciousness gets uploaded, it reminded me a lot of the cookies, the little digital copies in White Christmas. The similar idea of, I think it was, now I think about it, actually, I think it was almost the same little module that went on their temples that like sucks out a version of yourself that's a copy. And so that's something I've been thinking about lately is like, were these people, was it like, is it transplanting your brain in there or is it making a copy?
You know, and that's a great point you brought up also, Natalie, about the rewatchability, because it kind of makes you think. Sometimes a movie or a TV show with a great twist, like a truly iconic twist, like The Sixth Sense or Planet of the Apes, it's actually more rewarding to watch a second time. And I think that would actually apply to this episode. Because, yeah, you see it through a totally different lens. And the first time through, you're just trying to figure it out. But this time, you can really appreciate it for all those little touches.
Mm-hmm. But I do think it's also, I mean, part of what makes it work for me is the fact that there is this great reveal, but it doesn't come at the end. It comes, I don't remember exactly, like I would say halfway to 2/3 of the way through. And so once, you know, it's about, you know, the character's decision about whether to transition over, I think then, you know, there isn't this mystery and it really is just devoting its full attention to this sort of, you know, emotional dilemma. So for that reason, I think it also worked for me.
Well, but just to pick on what Natalie was saying too about the, you know, the question, I mean, this is a huge question in philosophy and philosophy of mind and stuff is, you know, could you transfer your mind into a computer and would that still be you? And this episode, from what I remember, completely elided that question. It just takes for granted the fact that it's still you inside the computer. And maybe that was the right way to, maybe that would have been too much of a distraction to get into that. But I did think that did strike me that it didn't really ever wrestle with that topic at all.
Well, it's kind of like Star Trek not dealing with teleporters. I mean, you kind of just have to avoid it for the sake of storytelling or the transporters because, you know, like obviously that's basically killing you and then creating a copy. So it's not really you. But for the sake of the story, it's probably best that they sidestepped it.
Or that would have had to been the focus of the whole story.
Right. Yeah, for sure. I have a theory about this, though. I think Charlie Brooker was having like an exceptionally good day when he wrote this episode or something, because it could have taken such a terrible dark turn at the end, and it didn't. Like, it surprised me genuinely because it seemed like it was heading towards a very dark finish when basically, you know, she was brokenhearted that the other woman didn't really want to be married, had kind of just done it out of pity, and now she was going to be alone in the simulation forever. And I thought maybe she was just going to elect for death at some point to just be released instead of, you know, having to go on in that state. But then he gave it the happy ending, so that was cool.
Yeah, I didn't think that. I mean, I definitely thought in that period before Kelly decides to pass over Yorkie was definitely heartbroken. But I sort of read it more as, because we see her for at least a few seconds before we get the reveal that Kelly also came. And like her hair is different. She's driving a sports car. And, you know, we know that she had become paralyzed in a car accident. Like she's clearly like gained some closure and gained a sense of her own identity, which we saw her like playing with the different outfits earlier. And so I got the sense that like she was kind of settling down her roots and making a life for herself. But if Kelly had never come back, she might have been in danger of becoming, you know, that kind of tragic gay character who has the one great love and then never has anyone else, kind of like Albus Dumbledore or characters like that. And so that was what I was worried about for her, that we were just going to get more of this, like, you know, you spent your whole life like feeling like you were punished for coming out, and then you got to have sex a few times, you fell in love, but you know now you're celibate for the rest of your life or the rest of eternity. So I saw it as like if she'd had to make that decision, I think for herself she would have stayed because she had finally kind of tapped into who she was and was like comfortable in her own skin. But I think it would have been hollow a hollow
Right.
experience.
And interestingly enough, apparently in the original draft, it was a heterosexual couple.
Yes.
But I really think that was such a great idea to change it up because it really added so much resonance to the whole thing.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, I agree.
Did anyone feel like I felt like the story was missing a beat? And maybe if I went back and watched it, this wouldn't bother me. But I felt like they have this huge fight, and then it went pretty much straight into the happy ending. And I felt like there was like something missing in the middle there.
I definitely feel like there was a beat missing because Kelly gives that great speech about why she's ready to go, and you know, even though she doesn't believe that there's a heaven, that's what, you know, her husband chose, and that's what her daughter had to go to because there was no San Junipero back then. And yeah, I thought that was such an impassioned speech, and then we didn't get the equivalent of an impassioned speech either of her changing her mind or of Yorkie convincing her, and it just felt like suddenly on came the soundtrack and the montage, which I will say created like the best pun for me with, you know, heaven is a place on earth. I was just cracking up at that. And I actually just rewatched, someone put that clip on YouTube today, and I was just watching The Office, like tearing up again.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, that it feels a little bit rushed. But I think what I liked about it was sort of the contrast where that it is this sort of this grand speech, and then when she actually decides, it's in this very sort of quiet moment where she's just sort of sitting there and you know, not even in the virtual reality, but just in her own body and thinking about it, and just sort of says it. Like, that moment to me, I thought was very effective, even if maybe the transition was a little bit awkward.
But what do you think led to that moment?
I don't know. I mean, I agree that like the foundation wasn't necessarily there, but that like the actress and the direction, I think, really sold it for me. That I could imagine her like that, or maybe even that the speech itself was sort of this catharsis, and then she's been thinking about it since then, and that was almost a part of her accepting the fact that really she did want to, you know, spend the rest of forever with this other person.
Yeah, you all make great points about that. To David's point, I think maybe they could have had a line in there somewhere about how she thought about what her dead husband might have wanted for her, like true happiness or something. But it was probably, in reality, just her sitting in a chair for hours upon hours contemplating it. And how do you really portray that? I guess they just figured it was good enough.
I mean, do you guys feel like the ending of this had more impact because it's, I believe, the first Black Mirror ending that wasn't like horrific for the characters? And it did, to me, like introduce a whole new, like, you know, it broadened the palette of the show, I think. So I would be curious, you know, going forward, how many more endings like this we might get that aren't, you know, the characters caught in a trap and can never get out.
I would say that I think Be Right Back also has an ending that's not completely tragic. I mean, I think it is eerie and sort of unsettling, but that's one that allows you to sort of think that in some ways, like, you know, things are moving forward positively.
Yeah, that's a good point, yeah.
But yeah, no, I agree that it's very unusual.
Boy, that's bleak, though, when Be Right Back is our baseline for a happy ending.
Well, and it was the same director for Be Right Back, Owen Harris, who did San Junipero. And yeah, no, because if I remember, I haven't watched it in years, I think Be Right Back is sort of Haley Atwell's character, you know, accepts the existence of this clone, not for herself, but for like their daughter. And so like keeps him up in the attic, which is so creepy, but like has her daughter be able, she sort of transcends her own selfishness of wanting to get rid of him by saying like, no, he'll be a part of my daughter's life, and she won't be cheated out of, you know, a life with him. And even though I no longer want that or no longer can have it. And so, yeah, I think there's a lot of similar themes about like selfishness or selflessness and giving up one thing. And like you were saying, Anthony, I think it was about thinking about like what Kelly's husband might have wanted for her is probably, if they could have talked, if he could have somehow been uploaded to San Junipero, he probably would have said as much to her of like, I want you with me, but I also want you to be happy.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm wondering, though, if they keep having happy endings, are they going to have to change the name of the show to like Later or something?
I don't think they're going to have too many happy endings.
Yeah, 1 out of 6 is, you know, not that many.
I mean, I guess it keeps you guessing, you know. I feel like it did elevate the episode somewhat. It would have been a classic either way, but it went from a 4.5 to a 5.0 just because you actually cried and laughed and were happy for them for once.
And I do think, actually, I mean, in some ways, I think it's more suspenseful when you're like, oh, this could actually go either way, versus like if you're just sitting there be like, well, obviously this isn't going to work out. This is going to go badly. So I think, having some range of possibility, I think, is probably good for opening up, just the storytelling opportunities.
And perhaps he was just afraid of repeating himself, because had it just been her stuck in San Junipero alone for eternity, it could have mirrored the ending of the Christmas episode a little bit too closely, where the guy was in the simulated world with time going on forever and ever, which to me was the bleakest one yet. I mean, that really seemed incredibly hellish.
I will say one thing I didn't like about the ending really quick was just that very last shot of like the two little like chips or whatever being put in side by side, which I thought was a little too cutesy and kind of not necessarily how I imagined all this sort of existing in the cloud. So I thought that was a little silly, but I forgive it despite that.
Yeah, it was a little bit hokey, and there was an interview I read with Charlie Brooker where he said that like he did write, he listened to Heaven's a Place on Earth when he was looking up music in '87, writing it, and like latched onto the song and latched onto the pun, and would have been heartbroken if they couldn't use it. So it could be that if it hadn't been so explicitly tied to a soundtrack, they might have stopped before that last visual. But I feel like because they were going for the, almost kind of saccharine ending, they probably were like, I feel like the inverse would be if you have, I don't know, like a Grey's Anatomy or one of those shows where it's almost like disaster porn, where it's like, we're going to have a boat crash into the plane, crash into the hospital. And it's like, is that too far? No, fuck it. It's sweet. So I feel like he probably had the opposite of like, we're already like partway there. We're already going for the feel good ending. Let's just go all the way is what I would think maybe.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a lot to say about San Junipero, but we got 2 more episodes to get to. So I think we're going to need to move on to the next one, which is Men Against Fire, which is there's a soldier in the near future after some sort of disaster that has apparently mutated some number of people into killer zombie monsters. But then he discovers that he's actually has some sort of VR system is misleading him into believing that innocent civilians who he's been tasked to kill are these zombie monsters to make it easier for him to kill them. So, Rafael, what'd you think about Men Against Fire?
Oh man, you had to ask me, huh? I actually, unfortunately, didn't care for this one too much. It was the only one that really bummed me out because I love the show so much in general that I thought this might have been the worst Black Mirror episode ever. It had some interesting ideas, but I didn't think it came together at all. I just thought, well, for one, it was just boring. And it was just very obvious what was happening the whole time. So it seemed like there was a seed of good commentary in there, but it just could have been executed a lot better. So I was kind of bummed out by it, actually.
Did anyone like it more than Rafael?
I liked it. I mean, I think maybe it's also because this is one where I didn't guess what the twist was. And so, like, I had this sort of multiple layers of surprise, which was when you realize that, I'm trying to remember what did they call it? Roaches, right?
Roaches, yeah.
Where I think at first you think, oh, is this like a Starship Troopers thing? You're like, oh, no, they're like humans, but they've been transformed. So that was already a surprise. And then when he was revealed that it was sort of, this trick, I thought that was really, that for me, because the twist worked, I think then the rest of the episode didn't have that. I guess it wasn't as boring for me. So I didn't think it was like a home run, but I thought it was like very solid all the way through. It was one of the sort of more on the nose metaphors, but I thought, translated into this very, affecting story, particularly when, you actually get to see the scene play out again without, the mask on. And I thought that was, pretty devastating.
See, Natalie, what did you think?
It is definitely one of my least favorite. I think because in the case of other episodes, if I start to catch on to the twist or whatever reversal they've engineered in, I still want to see where the story goes after it. And in this case, once, it was revealed that that he had the VR thing over his eyes that, put an enemy face on other humans, I kind of lost interest in where the rest of the story went. Although I will say it was one of those cases where the other, like the small other world building details, I would have wanted to follow those paths. One of which was, I don't know what you guys thought of this, but the rewards that the soldiers would get, like the main character, he gets, 2 kills on his first time out, and so they would say like, oh, well, you're going to have really good dreams tonight, and part of their programming is giving them these, hyper realistic, or in his case, hypersexual dream, and the visual of all the soldiers lying in bed, like with their fingers twitching, I assume, like controlling the mechanics of their dreams and sort of comparing notes the next morning, like, well, how'd you sleep? How'd you sleep? And becoming this hierarchy of, the teacher's pet, or the star soldier is the one who gets the sweetest sleep. Because it made me think of, like, I would love to see a Black Mirror story about that in relation to PTSD. And like, I was less interested in what face are they putting on the enemy, and I was more interested in like what treats are they giving to their soldiers, almost treating them like animals, and saying like, if I keep giving you these treats and this positive reinforcement, you'll keep going out and shooting roaches because it means that you get to have like a hot dream tonight.
I had not thought about that at all, Natalie, but that's brilliant. I really I think they should do that for an upcoming episode. Because yeah, I mean, I'm more with you guys on this, in that just this exact idea of soldiers having technology that makes them think they're fighting monsters when they're actually fighting people is an idea I've just seen many, many times before in science fiction. And I think maybe your enjoyment of this episode depends on whether you've come across that idea many times before or not. But, for me, it's just something I've been pretty familiar with for a really, really long time. So I was kind of disappointed to see. I mean, obviously, a lot of the Black Mirror episodes, they're not like the freshest ideas. I mean, some of them are, but a lot of them, they're just executed really well. But this one, I thought it was kind of like an overly familiar idea executed okay. And that wasn't enough really for me to, this was like Rafael saying, this was, I thought, the one I didn't like the most of this batch.
Yeah, overly familiar is a good way to describe it.
Yeah, but hey, if this is like the worst episode out of 18 or whatever that we'll get, then that's still not so bad.
True.
No, I mean, I was happy to watch it. I'd happily watch another episode that was about as good as this one. But
Yeah, and there were lots of little ideas in here that were interesting, and it did actually have Michael Kelly, who is a fantastic actor. So all his scenes where he was interrogating the soldier, all that stuff worked. I mean, there was none of it that didn't work per se, but it just didn't feel like it truly came together for me.
Yeah, I mean, I see what you guys are saying. I mean, I think that, part of it is, again, because I feel like a lot of the stuff in Black Mirror tends to be familiar and comes down to sort of execution. And I think, yeah, I wouldn't say the execution in this was sort of in the top tier, but it was like solid all the way through for me. I will also say, like, one of the little touches that I did like was, like, I think there is that familiar scene where you have somebody telling them, no, you signed up for this. Let me show you the video where you signed up for this before we erased your memory. But I think the thing I liked about that scene was how the soldier character, it wasn't that he was like, gung-ho and like, yes, I am going to sign up for this, but rather that he was just sort of very blasé about the whole thing in this way that felt very real, where he was just like, oh yeah, sure, whatever, I'm signing up. This is all cool. And like it almost was like he signed on the dotted line without, acknowledging it, but kind of not caring. And I thought, like, there are a couple other touches like that where that I sort of believed it, I guess, emotionally. And so that was why it worked for me.
And that was interesting, actually, in that his entire personality seemed to have been changed. It made you wonder how much they had actually erased, how far back they had reformatted him, so to speak.
Definitely, yeah. It kind of brings to mind Joss Whedon's show Dollhouse from forever ago, where you have these people who volunteer to become these blank slates that then they have to have their personalities wiped in order to have, host personalities put into them. But it's the same thing. Like, these people, they came to the Dollhouse with debt or being, crimes or being chased by the government, and maybe not. It wasn't that lofty or that dire for this guy when he signed up, but I definitely saw echoes of that, the sense of, yeah, that he just signed on the dotted line without thinking about the consequences, which actually also made me think of Cooper in Playtest, how you could argue that, he signed the stuff about the procedure, and the woman even warns him and says, it's a small medical procedure, and he's just signing away probably like a liability waiver that said, if your phone goes off in the middle of implantation, it's not our fault. And so I found a parallel between the two of them, of these people who just took on this tech, and we don't know why they weren't being more fastidious about it, but they just did.
Well, let me say, Rafael, I really like that hadn't occurred to me, but like, maybe if I went back and watched it, but I mean, the idea that he's looking at how he was before they made him a soldier and thinking, man, I used to be this callow dumbass. What is the value of what I was before this? Like, I don't like who I was before this any more than I like myself now. So what difference does it make? And I feel like more could have been made out of that rather than sort of, they basically put a gun to his head in terms of like playing the horrible memories over and over until he relents, right? And if he was a bit more of an active character making that decision, I think that might have had a little bit more impact for me.
Right, and speaking of impact with the final scene, I think they could have maximized it a little more. Instead of having him show up at a house where he's seeing a nice house and a dream girl, and in reality it's dilapidated, I actually misunderstood what was happening there initially. I thought the choice being offered to him was be incarcerated, relive the footage over and over, or just be reprogrammed and go back into the field and kill more roaches. And I actually thought it would have been more satisfying and darker for him to make that choice, like rather than be tormented indefinitely, just to go back out there and forget and once again be killing roaches.
Wait, so he's not going back into the field?
No, I guess I'm still confused, which is part of the problem with the episode.
Yeah, I'm
but
confused too.
But I even went to like Wikipedia to read the synopsis just to make sure I understood, and it says he's been discharged. And so I don't really understand how that works. Like the whole facade with the house and the dream girl as opposed to an empty house. I mean, I don't really know how that's supposed to play out except for just a shock ending. So I don't get it.
Yeah, I interpreted it more as like he was like on leave and then he'd be going back into the field, but I don't have any necessarily textual evidence to back that up, except I don't remember the Michael Kelly character saying you're going to be discharged.
Me either. So I thought he was going back into the field, but I was left confused, I guess.
Natalie, were you going to say something?
Oh, I'm about as confused as you guys because I don't remember honorable discharge being an option, but then he was there in his uniform, so I thought that might be the case, and then I thought maybe he was in like a permanent mental loop with the girl in the sex fantasy as part of the honorable discharge. But then I thought like that seems way too nice of them after everything he's done. Because I agree, I assumed they were just going to wipe him and put him back in the field. So I was
and perhaps. And I guess if we really analyze it, Anthony's probably right. I mean, he was wearing his dress uniform, not his fatigues. So he's still in the service, but he's not on active duty. So I don't know what the hell's happening.
Right. And why spend the time on this guy if you're just going to discharge him? You know, and like make him go through this terrible choice.
Well, and he was a newbie. I mean, they make the point of saying they make the point of saying first time out, you kill 2 roaches. But then I wondered if they wipe these soldiers often enough, maybe everyone is always on their first time out.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, well, to play armchair screenwriter, had I had a crack at this, I would have had the woman and her son survive that scene in the middle, and then have them show up at the end where once again he's reprogrammed out in the field and he does kill them, even though earlier he had let them go, and that would have been appropriately dark.
Charlie Brooker should have given you a call.
If only. Charlie, are you listening?
All right, cool. And so then the last episode in this batch was called Hated in the Nation. So there are people who are the subject of internet hate mobs on Twitter are turning up dead, and some detectives are investigating that. So Natalie, what do you think about Hated in the Nation?
I liked it a lot. I thought it was a good kind of near future speculative story, while definitely having tech that was far enough ahead that it felt very ominous and felt like it could happen, but it has not happened yet. I loved Kelly MacDonald. I loved her cranky inspector and how she was kind of very subtly tech phobic, or in the sense that she would, look down on her assistant Blue for it seemed like she thought that, Twitter was trivial. And I kind of loved, as someone, who's been working in digital media for the last 8 years. And I mean, I remember I wrote a play about Twitter when it was a thing that nobody knew what it was. It was very gratifying to see someone who dismissed it and then was very handily reminded oh no, it's much more powerful than you think. So I really liked it.
How about Anthony? What'd you think of this one?
Yeah, no, I loved it. This was probably my favorite episode of the season, which, I mean, I don't think it's actually the best episode. I think it's actually falls short of that by a pretty wide margin, but this is the one that I just enjoyed the most purely. And I think it was Black Mirror in a lot of ways sort of embracing like the sort of like pulpy B-movie side of itself. And like when like I found out that it was going to involve killer bees, I was so happy. And like, I mean, and it's not like it's like campy or anything. Like, I mean, I think it totally treats a lot of these ideas very seriously. But it also, while also making moments for like comedy, but it also doesn't back away from the fact that it's about killer bees, and you like see like CGI swarms of killer bees, and like that, I just thought like, you know, like treating this seriously, but also like willing to go a little crazy with it. I think just, you know, made me really like it.
Yeah, this was my favorite episode of this batch, and I agree with everything you just said, but I think one of the reasons I liked it so much is because it deals in such a significant way, I would think, with the phenomenon of internet hate mobs and just people being angry on the internet and not thinking about how the targets of their ire are real people with feelings and things like that. And yeah, so like you're saying, it just merged the sort of detective story, killer bee swarm kind of aspect of Black Mirror with the serious social critique aspect in a really, really effective way, I thought.
Well, I hope Charlie Brooker isn't listening this time, because my friends and I thought it was probably the second to worst of the season, or the fifth best, however you want to look at it. I thought it was interesting. It had a lot of good parts. The fact that it was kind of like a sci-fi techno thriller for about 2/3 of it, and then the Black Mirror social commentary aspects that we come to expect kind of factored in once the public was able to take control of the Death to hashtag, and you saw how that was going amiss. But ultimately, I don't know. For one, I don't think it needed to be 90 minutes. I think it could have easily been shortened to regular length and would have been just fine. And I don't know. There was nothing wrong with it. I liked it fine, but I just thought the first four were superlative. And, you know, so I don't know. Being the final episode, it just didn't end on a bang for me.
I don't know, Natalie, you want to respond to that in any way?
Well, I think I agree it could be shortened. Like, I didn't quite understand why it was 90 minutes. It was sort of like, felt like it was trying to be a movie, but lacked some of the depth to totally do that, to be a total standalone. So looking at things to shorten, I feel like the whole frame story of how there was this hearing about what happened, I feel like they were trying, that fell flat a little bit in the intent of, you know, generating a sense of dread, and why is she telling the story, and where, you know, where's her assistant, where are the other players that they've talked about. And because, you know, it's a little unclear like how soon after the tragedy it's been, although we do then see, well, no, and then we see her and the assistant, you know, walking through the Hall of Bodies, which is a very striking visual. But I feel like both of those things, the hearing and the Hall of Bodies, were too little. And if they were really going to lean into being 90 minutes, I would have wanted to see a lot more of that to get a sense of, you know, losing 387,000 people, how much of an impact it was.
Well, and also, if you're going to make it 90 minutes, I wish they'd made it 91 and given us a definitive ending, because none of us could figure out what really happened at the end. I mean, I don't know if it's meant to be intentionally ambiguous, but it's like the whole episode, it seemed really obvious that Blue was working with the terrorist, the bad guy. And then it turned out, well, she wasn't, apparently. But so I guess the twist was that she was actually a cop all along. But the whole way that she walked up and just introduced herself and was never really questioned about her credentials, it seemed telegraphed to us. I don't know. I guess it was a hive mind mentality. But my friends and I, as we were watching it, were like, this Blue has a secret. Like, there's going to be some reveal later who she really is. You know, the understudy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that never occurred to me at all.
So then basically at the very end, she says she's found him and she's tailing him. And, well, if she really was, you know, a well-intentioned cop all along, I feel like we should have gotten some resolution there. But if she also was working with him all along, then we should have. Either way, I wanted to know more. It just felt annoyingly ambiguous.
All right, well, I'll tell you how I read the ending was that it never occurred to me that she was some sort of double agent or anything. It seems pretty clear at the end to me that she's going to kill him once they go around the corner there.
Yeah,
and he's also going to suffer the consequences of, his activities on the internet in the same way that he inflicted on all these people.
Yeah, I think I definitely agree that I thought Blue was somehow in on it. Like, her presence seemed a bit convenient in parts. But I think that my read of it was that was intended to sort of show how at odds she and Karen were. That to Karen it literally was that, this girl pops up out of nowhere and is my shadow, and we don't speak the same language. And I think that Karen also had some, what's the word, judgment about the fact that Blue had moved out of, I think it was forensics, and Blue had explained that, she did all the cybercrime and she saw these awful photos. And I think it kind of gave her maybe not PTSD full blown, but something similar. And so she moved into this other realm. And like I said, I think Karen kind of looked down on her for it. So the way I was reading her arc was that by the end, whether she already had this training or whether this is this ambitious thing she did, she basically faked her death, cut her hair, went off and tracked him down herself. And so I read it as she finally achieved something in Karen's eyes, where Karen was like, atta girl, go get him, go follow him around the corner and kill him and show him the consequences.
I mean, I suppose there's a redemptive arc there, because otherwise it's kind of like, assuming that she was a double agent the whole time made sense to me and my friends, because it's like every step of the way she's leading them towards the eventuality that he wanted. She was helping facilitate everything that happened. And so she was either in on it or just kind of incredibly incompetent. But I mean, we were actually laughing at times at how incompetent the police really were. Like, it was comical at one point. It's like when the prime minister's like, I'm number one on the death to list, where do I go? We were like, well, plan A, a house in the country, didn't work. So how about we actually use a bunker this time? I mean, why did they take that poor girl? They did that girl no favors. Like, yeah, let's take you out to the middle of the countryside in a house with lots of ventilation and windows. I mean, I
agree with that. I mean, that especially that sequence, while it was incredibly suspenseful, with the third girl who was going to be killed, was very suspenseful. But it was also kind of like, this is your plan. This is not a great plan at all. And you would just see arbitrarily open windows and doors. And you're like, why? But I did think, I agree with Raphael's point that I felt like Blue as a character felt a little underdeveloped and I think some of the turns, but I don't think, I guess I had less of a problem with her sort of incompetence, because I felt like the way it was supposed to be structured was this idea that everything that they're doing is what a detective would do to advance the case, and that's the thing that sort of springs the trap. So in that sense, it didn't bother me.
Let me just say about the safe house, because that it didn't occur to me that they should have a better plan, because I'm thinking of when Salman Rushdie was targeted by religious extremists. He tells this story where, the government sent some guys to protect him. And he said, so you're going to take me to a safe house or something? And they're like, no, that's just in movies. You got to find your own place to stay. We're your bodyguards, but there's no such thing as safe houses. That's just in movies.
Sure, but in this case, I thought it was irresponsible from the get-go when they show up at her apartment without some kind of hazmat suit to protect her. And they could have at least just taken her to a bank vault or some room without ventilation so the bees couldn't get to her,
That's a really good point.
That's a fair point.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where I think a lot of times it's very easy to sort of justify characters behaving sort of dumbly, because that's how we behave often in real life. But I think particularly for this kind of mystery thriller, you want to be following a character who knows what they're doing and is really making an attempt to outwit the bad guy. And so to have them feel sort of Keystone Cops-ish in that moment was pretty frustrating.
The thing I really liked about this episode, though, was all the twists. I felt like the twist, maybe I'm just an idiot, but I didn't see most of them coming. But I thought, even with the cake, I thought was such a great red herring. I was like, wait, what's the cake? And it turned out, that wasn't the thing. But there were things like that throughout, and with the police guy tweeting tweeting at the terrorist.
That was such a great moment. That was the, watching it through your fingers horror movie moment of no, you idiot.
Mm-hmm.
But I just thought that was such a dumb moment for him, because when you're about to close in on this guy, you should not be tweeting at him. That's the worst thing to do. So I liked that he was, one of the police officers ended up as one of the victims, but I thought they could have done a better job of justifying how he ended up on that list. But I also agree, yeah, I think that we were talking earlier about the sort of 90-minute length, which I agree that I think sometimes the fact that it's that much longer gives it this sort of additional weight, and I'm not sure it has that sort of weightiness that maybe we expected, but I think it gives the plot more room to sort of run through some of these like loose ends and like, fake you out a couple times and I think combine some of these different science fictional elements. So I think for that reason, I think like I didn't mind the 90-minute runtime.
I also just think the idea of the bees to replace, to the robot bees to replace the bees because of colony collapse disorder, just on its own, I think is a cool idea.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. As an overall comment for this batch of episodes, I liked how this episode was kind of a techno sci-fi thriller. I liked that we had a horror episode. I liked that there was kind of a military sci-fi action episode. But I always kind of gauge how much I like these based on the Black Mirror social commentary sci-fi quotient, I guess. And I thought this one kind of tread on territory we'd already covered a little bit in the very first episode, the national anthem. I mean, basically, people using YouTube and Twitter are terrible. It's like, we get it, I guess. So I felt like if that was all this one had to say, then it wasn't really doing anything that new.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe part of like, because I've noticed this episode tends to get some of the most negative reviews. And I do think like if you're really attached to the idea of Black Mirror as social commentary, I don't think it's necessarily this. I mean, I think there is material there. I don't want to sell it short, but I don't know that that's the biggest selling point. But I feel like to me, I like the idea that Black Mirror can be a bigger tent maybe than it has been in the past, in the same way that I didn't necessarily mind that, Playtest would just be sort of this kind of, fun horror romp. So in that sense, it didn't bother me. And maybe that's why I was able to sort of embrace it a little bit more.
I don't know. I just like the idea of all the people who post obnoxious comments on websites, just to pick a random example like Wired.com. All being killed. I thought that was an interest. There was something strangely intriguing to me about that premise.
Not that you had any particular commenters in mind or anything.
I almost wish they would have gone further with it. It would have been kind of interesting to see it play out over a span of weeks where someone kept dying every day. I don't know.
Where a hated person kept dying and it would take longer to get to the true reveal, do you mean? About like actually killing the people making the hashtag?
I just mean that it could have gained even more momentum, just to see, because if it really played out in reality, it makes you wonder who would actually be at risk, who are the most hated people in the world. And because when I was thinking about the dilemma with the prime minister or whoever he was,
Prime Minister.
And he was concerned that he was number one and he wanted to get bumped down to number two by making someone else more hated.
See, that was good too. I don't know.
But
yeah,
it's
I
like,
love the rankings.
But it's like, that's not really going to save you in the end unless you're going to do that every day. Like he was still going to be way up there at risk the next day and the next day. So I kind of was curious about that aspect.
That's really interesting, actually, Rafael. Like, yeah, if they hadn't had the techno thriller plot, but it was instead just every day people on Twitter can vote to kill someone and there's nothing you can do to stop it. What happens as a result of that week after week after week? How
Absolutely.
Does that play out?
And I actually think like, since that to me is really the heart of the Black Mirror-esque part of it, like we could have just had that without the bees at all, and it would have been really interesting.
Or maybe every day the prime minister has to release, okay, so the government's been spying on everyone, and so he has dirt on all these different people, and every day he has to release dirt on somebody to make them the most hated person on Twitter, so that he doesn't die each day.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, think about it. Like all of a sudden you've got 15, 20 people dead. It's someone every single day. That would get really terrifying.
Yeah, I agree. I was going to say that I agree that I think is maybe the more ethically complex version of that story. My only response is that I really enjoyed the version of the story that we got, so it doesn't bother me as much.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. I enjoyed all of these. I mean, we're basically just grading, like I said, on they're all really good. I mean, if they had the other 6 episodes online, I'd be watching them right now.
Well, yeah, say a little bit more about that, because there's going to be a season 4 coming up at some point.
Yeah, do we know when those are airing yet?
I don't.
No, I don't think so.
Let's find out real quick. I'll Google it.
I'm not sure if it's been announced yet when they're airing. But yeah, I mean, there were 6 episodes. Apparently, have they made all 12 already? Or I'm not sure. I thought that
I don't think so, because they're still announcing some of the writers or some of the directors, I think, for season 4. So I don't think they've actually made them yet.
Okay, but I think I seem to have read somewhere that they were originally planning to just do a season 3, and then they just ended up with enough episodes to do 2 more seasons. So that's the current plan.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
And I'm still in shock we even got a season 3. I thought it was done after, the 6 episodes we already had, or the 7 with the Christmas episode. So as long as they keep making it, I think it's great. I mean, they probably shouldn't do it forever, because I think on some level, you don't want to be like the Twilight Zone and remake the same episode 5 or 6 times. I think, but if he does 4 or 5 seasons, then I think that'll probably be great.
Yeah, well, we've come up with like 2 or 3 good ideas for an episode just on this podcast, so maybe they'll.
Yeah, and I think we're all 4 of us are free to write for the next season. So,
Oh yeah,
Absolutely.
Totally.
All right, cool. So we're pretty much out of time. So I don't know. Anyone else have anything else they wanted to throw in before we wrap this up?
I would say that as much as I enjoyed this season, I would say that I thought season 2 was a little bit stronger. Particularly because I think Be Right Back is probably my all-time favorite episode. But I just thought like the quality of the writing in season 2 especially was just really strong across the board. Whereas season 3, it felt a little bit more uneven, and I don't know how much of that was like producing more episodes and writing more episodes. But I didn't necessarily love it quite as much as at least Rafael did.
Well, I'm curious if you guys are, what would you say are your top 3 episodes of all of them at this point? Did this crack your top 3, any of the new episodes?
Just to remind people, the episodes prior to this were the National Anthem, 15 Million Merits, The Entire History of You, Be Right Back, White Bear, The Waldo Moment, and White Christmas.
I mean, for me personally, Entire History of You is still the most brilliant. I mean, that's the one that Robert Downey Jr. optioned to make a feature out of. I hope he still does. I think that one is just amazing. I might, at this moment, it might be reactionary, but I'd put San Junipero at number 2. And I don't know. I mean, I think Nosedive was really, really good. So that could potentially be up there, or also Be Right Back. But yeah, I guess somewhere in that 3 to 4 for me.
I mean, I think my 3 favorites from the earlier episodes were National Anthem, 15 Million Merits, and White Christmas. And I don't know if any of these I thought were stronger than those. Like I said, Hated of the Nation and Nosedive were my favorites from this season. So yeah, I don't know. I think I might agree with Anthony that I preferred the earlier episodes.
That I felt like there weren't quite as many home runs, I thought, as maybe in past seasons.
Well, we did get more episodes, so I guess, you're going to get more great ones and a few not so great, so I don't know. White Christmas isn't necessarily in my top tier, but I do think it has the most horrible depictions of suffering. I mean, like the woman's consciousness who's downloaded into basically she runs the house. And that's her whole existence. It reminds me of like that thing on Rick and Morty where it's like, what is my function? It's like you.
Oh, the butter robot, right?
The butter robot, yeah.
See, Natalie, do you want to say how you thought season 3 stacked up?
Yeah, sure. I agree. Not a lot of home runs. I think I read interviews with Charlie Brooker where he said that because they were dropping all the episodes at once, as opposed to I think the other seasons came out like week by week, they kind of varied up the tone, and I think that might have weakened it a little bit. I think my favorites are still like Entire History of You, White Christmas. I think also White Bear. But if I could, throw another one in, also a reactionary, but I think genuine response, San Junipero is pretty high up there.
Oh, David, real quick, you had kind of asked me earlier for the temperature on the binge party I threw over the weekend, but I would definitely say, for what it's worth, everyone really seemed to enjoy the first 4 episodes a lot, and maybe it was just fatigue, but the 5th and 6th ones less so. So I don't know. But I do think overall the season was pretty strong, actually. I mean, to me, it had 4 either classics or almost classics.
All right, cool. So I think I'm going to give Anthony the last word here. So Anthony, final word.
I think I'm really glad that the show's continuing. I like the fact that, as much as maybe some of us might prefer sort of the darker, harder hitting version of Black Mirror, I think the fact that if it's going to keep going, I think it has to continue to sort of branch out and explore different formats and tones. So, I mean, as much as I had reservations about some of the episodes, I think that is a really good thing.
All right, cool. And so I think we're going to wrap things up there. So we've been speaking with Rafael Jordan, Anthony Ha, and Natalie Zutter. So guys, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that was our panel. So big thanks again to Rafael Jordan, Anthony Ha, and Natalie Zutter for joining us on the show. And remember that Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoy the show and want it to continue, please sign up to give us $1 or $2 per episode over at patreon.com/geeks. And if you'd rather make a one-time or fixed monthly contribution, you can do that via PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. And I want to give a special thank you to Patricia Levinson and Jason Enberg, who both just made very generous contributions to the show via PayPal. Jason also just signed up this week to be the latest listener supporting us on Patreon. So big thanks again to Patricia Levinson and Jason Enberg, and to everyone else who's made contributions to the podcast. We really appreciate it. All right, so that was our show. So thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.
The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is a production of Wired.com. For more information about the show, visit geeksguideshow.com. To learn more about your host, visit davidbarrkirtley.com. Music and voiceover produced by yours truly, Jack Kincaid. If you enjoyed this program, tell your friends. If you didn't enjoy it, tell no one. Thank you for listening.